Welcome back to Rapture Tales. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get ready for another story you won't forget. Let's dive back to the story. The open market was already alive with chaos when Amelia Carter stepped onto the uneven pavement, her white cane tapping softly against the ground as she followed the familiar sound of her husband's footsteps. The air was thick with the smell of raw vegetables, engine oil, damp cardboard, and human sweat. Traders shouted prices without mercy. Buses hissed as they halted abruptly, and impatient bodies brushed past her from every direction. Amelia had learned to survive in places like this by listening closely, by memorizing the rhythm of movement around her, by trusting her instincts. She moved carefully, her free hand clutching a small shopping list folded neatly in her palm. 8 years of marriage had taught her that silence was often safer than questions, especially on days when Daniel Carter's mood was sharp and unpredictable. Still, she never imagined that this ordinary trip would become the moment her life cracked open in front of strangers. Daniel stopped suddenly, irritation radiating from him like heat. He muttered complaints under his breath, loud enough for nearby traders to hear, accusing Amelia of walking too slowly, of embarrassing him in public. Before she could steady herself or respond, his frustration erupted. The force came without warning, a hard kick to her side that sent her stumbling into a stall of tomatoes. Pain exploded through her body, sharp and disorienting, stealing the breath from her lungs. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted. Another voice cursed Daniel openly. Amelia fell to her knees, her cane skidding away, but even then she did not scream. She steadied herself with trembling hands, her face composed despite the humiliation burning deeper than the physical pain. Daniel laughed bitterly, mocking her blindness, calling her useless, blaming her for everything that had gone wrong in his life. In that moment, Amelia understood something with terrifying clarity. The cruelty was no longer accidental. It was deliberate, rooted in contempt and fear. As she was helped to her feet by strangers whose faces she could not see, Amelia listened carefully to Daniel's breathing, to the subtle tremor beneath his anger. Guilt lived there. Secrets lived there. And while the crowd whispered and stared, Amelia made a quiet decision. She would never confront him with tears or weakness. She would wait. She would listen. And when the time came, she would strike back not with violence, but with truth so sharp it would leave nothing standing. At home, Amelia sat alone for hours, replaying every sound she had heard in the market, every shift in Daniel's tone over the past several months. Blindness had sharpened her other senses, and Daniel had grown careless. Late-night calls he thought she couldn't track. Soft footsteps moving away from the bedroom. Conversations abruptly ending when she entered a room. Using her phone's accessibility features, Amelia had already been recording fragments of his life without him knowing. Bank alerts read aloud. Emails dictated slowly into her ears. Transaction summaries she memorized line by line. Daniel believed her blindness made her dependent. In reality, it had made her observant. Piece by piece, the truth formed. Daniel was having an affair with his secretary, Sophie Reynolds. The woman was younger, ambitious, and greedy enough to believe the lies he fed her. Worse still, the money funding Sophie's lavish lifestyle did not belong to Daniel. It came from investments quietly placed years earlier by Amelia's father, Sir Jonathan Whitmore, a man whose wealth was old, strategic, and merciless when betrayed. Daniel had access accounts he was never meant to touch, moving funds slowly, thinking no one would notice. Amelia noticed everything. She began planning with the patience of someone who had learned to survive in darkness. Every step was calculated. She waited until she knew Daniel's routine perfectly, until she knew Sophie's weaknesses, until she knew exactly how much money had been stolen and where it had gone. When the time came, Amelia did not announce herself. She simply appeared. The restaurant was expensive, quiet, filled with people who spoke in low, important voices. Amelia entered calmly, her cane clicking softly against marble floors. Conversations paused. Daniel froze when he heard her voice. Sophie laughed at first, assuming Amelia was merely an inconvenience, until Amelia spoke with devastating precision. She revealed bank transfers, dates, lies Daniel had told, and the truth behind Sophie's jewelry, apartment, and designer clothes. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Sophie's laughter died. Daniel's world collapsed in real time. Within days, Sir Jonathan Whitmore intervened. Contracts were reviewed. Clauses Daniel had never read carefully were activated. He was given 72 hours to return every stolen pound with interest or lose everything: his firm, his reputation, his future. Sophie, humiliated and furious, leaked messages and evidence to the press. Headlines exploded. The architect who kicked his blind wife became a national disgrace. Daniel lost everything. Amelia gained everything that had always been hers: custody, control, peace. Months later, Amelia stood in her office, now the head of a thriving, ethical company. She did not need sight to know she had won. When Daniel returned, broken and apologetic, she listened quietly. Then she set boundaries, supervised visits. No excuses, no second chances. Blindness had never been her weakness. It had been the reason she saw the truth before anyone else. Amelia's new life did not arrive with celebration or loud declarations. It unfolded quietly, deliberately, the way all strong foundations are laid. Each morning she arrived at the office early, her fingers brushing the cool surface of the desk as she oriented herself. Her assistant reading schedules aloud, while Amelia absorbed every detail with focused calm. Employees who had once whispered about her blindness now spoke of her discipline, her precision, and her uncanny ability to detect problems before they exploded. She listened more than she spoke, and when she spoke, her words carried weight. Under her leadership, the company shed its old reputation for greed and shortcuts. Contracts were reviewed carefully, workers were paid fairly, and integrity became more than a slogan. It became policy. Amelia did not lead with fear the way Daniel once had. She led with clarity, and people followed because they trusted her judgment. Public attention remained intense, but Amelia refused to be reduced to a headline. Invitations poured in, interviews, panels, award ceremonies, but she chose selectively, protecting her peace. When she finally agreed to speak at a women's leadership forum, her voice was steady and composed, free of bitterness. She spoke about power, not revenge, about silence, not shame, about how society often mistakes disability for helplessness, forgetting that strength takes many forms. Her words resonated deeply, especially with women who had endured quiet suffering. Letters arrived daily from strangers who found courage in her story. Amelia listened to every one of them, not because she needed validation, but because she understood what it meant to be unheard. At home, life slowly settled into a rhythm built around her children. They were still young enough to ask difficult questions without malice. Why Daddy didn't live with them anymore? Why Mummy worked so much? Amelia answered honestly, without poisoning their hearts. She spoke of consequences, of responsibility, of love that does not harm. Therapy sessions became part of their routine, creating a safe space for healing. Amelia never allowed her pain to become their burden. She wanted them to grow up knowing that strength did not require cruelty, and that accountability was not the same as punishment. Daniel's downfall continued long after the headlines faded. Attempts to rebuild his career were met with closed doors and polite refusals. Former colleagues avoided him. Friends distanced themselves. Shame followed him everywhere, quiet but persistent. When he finally swallowed his pride and asked for help, the answer was not what he expected. Amelia did not gloat. She did not insult him. She simply explained the boundaries she had already set. Supervised visits, clear schedules, respect or nothing at all. Daniel agreed because he had no leverage left. Humility, once foreign to him, had become unavoidable. During those visits, Amelia watched him closely, not with bitterness, but with caution. She noticed the way his voice softened around the children, the way he hesitated before speaking, as if afraid of saying the wrong thing. Change, she knew, was possible, but it was never guaranteed. Trust, once broken so violently, could not be restored with apologies alone. It required consistency, accountability, and time. Amelia allowed space for growth, but never surrendered control of her life again. As months passed, the company expanded. International partnerships formed. Amelia's leadership style attracted investors who valued transparency and long-term vision. Sir Jonathan Whitmore, proud but discreet, watched from a distance, offering counsel only when asked. He saw not the blind daughter others pitied, but a strategist who understood power better than most men in boardrooms. Amelia no longer needed protection. She had become her own shield. One evening, long after the office had emptied, Amelia remained seated alone, listening to the hum of the building. She reflected not on what she had lost, but on what she had learned. Pain had stripped illusions from her life, revealing truth in its rawest form. She understood now that love without respect was a prison, and silence without strategy was surrender. Her blindness had forced her inward, sharpening perception where others relied too heavily on appearances. When Daniel eventually asked quietly if she could ever forgive him, Amelia did not answer immediately. Forgiveness, she knew, was not an event. It was a process. She told him the truth, that forgiveness did not mean reconciliation, nor did it erase consequences. It simply meant releasing the power his actions once held over her peace. Daniel nodded, accepting what he could not change. Amelia's life moved forward with intention. She continued advocating for women, for people with disabilities, for ethical leadership. Her story was no longer about humiliation, but about transformation. She had been broken in public, but rebuilt herself in private, with patience and precision. In the end, Amelia stood exactly where she belonged, not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as a woman who had learned to see beyond sight, beyond fear, beyond betrayal. Her blindness had never defined her limits. It had revealed her strength, guiding her through darkness into a future she built on her own terms. That's all for today. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.